Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with strawberry blender cake. That's right, making a batter with a blender might not make the best cake, but it might make your best cake, especially if you plan on serving it with some sweet cream and fresh strawberries, which is exactly what we're gonna do. And to get started, let's take care of the least exciting step first, which would be to place a piece of parchment paper in an oiled loaf pan or a loaf-shaped glass baking dish like I'm using here. And once that's been papered, we can head to the blender, where we will dump in 1 cup of sliced strawberries. And you see how those are nice and red and beautifully ripe and sweet? That is what you're going to want to use. And then to that we will add 3 eggs, followed by the vegetable oil of your choice. And pretty much anything with a neutral flavor will work. And then we're also going to want a nice big pinch of sugar, followed by the freshly grated zest from 1 lemon, as well as the juice from half the lemon. And then we'll finish up with a small touch of real pure vanilla extract. And once all that's in there, we'll pop on the lid, and we'll pulse this on and off to get it started, before we blend on high speed for about 10 seconds. And once that's set, we will stop and add the last ingredient, which is going to be a couple of cups of self-rising flour, which is simply regular flour that has some baking powder and salt mixed in. And that's it. We'll pop the lid back on, and we'll blend this for about 30 seconds or so. And if you have to stop a couple times and use a spatula to scrape the sides down, please do. Right, the only way to screw this up would be to have big clumps of unmixed in flour. So don't do that. And that's it. We'll go ahead and take that and transfer it into our prepared baking dish. And as I was doing this, I was thinking, man, that batter looks a little bit thin. And since this was a new recipe for me that I adapted from an old citrus cake recipe, I was thinking, do I need a little more flour? Or did I maybe use too many strawberries? But anyway, we'll get to those questions later on in the video. But regardless of what cake batter you're talking about, once we transfer it in, we should grab a towel and we should give this the old tappa, which of course is going to settle the batter down and possibly bring a few of the bigger air bubbles up to the top. And that's it. Once tapped, it's ready to transfer into the center of a 350-degree oven for about 45 minutes, or until it looks like this. Oh yeah, that looks pretty nice, and it looks pretty done. But as you know, we try not to guess in the kitchen. So we'll test it with a bamboo skewer, which should come out clean, and mine did. And once we know it's cooked long enough, what we'll do is let it cool right in the pan or dish, all the way down to room temp, before we try to slice it. And while we're waiting, we can move on to prep our strawberries. And for that, we will take a pound of them and slice them up, and we'll pour over half a cup of sugar, and we'll give that the old shaka before we grab a spoon and sort of press things down. And we could, if we want, try to mix it at this point, but you're probably just going to get sugar everywhere, especially if you used a tiny bowl like this. So what I'm going to do after pressing everything down a little bit is simply cover this with a plate and put the spoon on top and let it sit for about a half an hour, at which point we'll come back and give it a proper stirring. And as you know, that sugar is going to draw out all those amazing juices from the berries. And the longer you let this sit, the juicier it's going to get. And my general game plan is to let this sit on the counter for a couple hours, stirring it every 20 to 30 minutes or so. And once I'm happy with how the strawberries are looking, and with the amount of juice that's been produced, we can go ahead and wrap that up and pop it in the fridge until we need it, since I kind of like the strawberry component being cold. So that's exactly what I did. And then assuming our blender cake is cooled down all the way, we'll go ahead and remove that from the dish and pull off the paper. And then I took a knife and sliced in, hoping I was wrong about thinking the batter was too thin. And the first slice actually looked pretty good, and I was feeling a little bit better. But after cutting the second piece, I could see we had an issue, which you're going to see even more clearly on the third piece. Right, you see that strip near the bottom that looks sort of compressed and almost like raw dough. And while the texture of the cake otherwise was pretty much perfect, and also I loved the flavor, I decided I did after all need to adjust the ingredient amounts. But the good news is, like I said, the sponge was really nice, and the cake had a very pleasant, surprisingly strong strawberry flavor. So before I headed back to the lab, I decided to play one up. And what we'll do first is utterly and completely soak that sponge with our strawberry juices. as in absolute saturation, where it can't hold any more. And then we'll top that with lots of fresh berries before we transfer on more than enough sweetened whipped cream. And by the way, besides the whipped cream and a little bit of sugar, I also added in some mascarpone, since I enjoyed that so much in the recent strawberry sando video. And of course, we'll include the ingredients for that in the written recipe. But if you want just regular whipped cream, will work. Alright, just please do not use the whipped topping from the store. That stuff is evil and bad luck. And that's it, we'll top our whipped cream with more strawberries. And then we'll top that with more strawberries. Before finishing up with a few more strawberries. And after taking way too many pictures, I grabbed a fork and went in for a taste. And that, my friends, really was an amazing strawberry dessert. All right, what we have here is basically strawberry shortcake. But instead of using a plain piece of cake, or biscuit, or a scone, or whatever you make your strawberry shortcake with, here we're using a base that already tastes like strawberry. And above and beyond that little bit of extra flavor, I thought the texture of the cake was perfect for this, since what we want it to do is soak in lots of juice without collapsing and becoming wet and mushy, which can definitely happen with some types of cakes. My only complaint is that I should have put this in a bowl and eaten it with a spoon instead of a fork, so as to get every drop of goodness. But anyway, I deem this a complete success, except that little bit of issue we had at the bottom of the cake. So I adjusted the amounts and baked another loaf, and I'm very happy to report that seemed to have fixed the problem. Or it did have a little something in the center, but it was barely noticeable. And as you can see, this slice does look better. But of course I have to check, so I plated it up, in a bowl this time, and I ate it with a spoon. And I have to say the cheater method for using a blender to make the batter really does work out very well. And whether you're a total beginner or an expert baker, as long as you can find some nice ripe sweet strawberries, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.